Welcome back. Now that we've covered the parts of a check, let's talk about the history of checks. I know, as soon as you hear the word history, your eyes glaze over, but I promise I'll make it quick. Off we go. The first appearance of checks is still up for debate. Some say checks, or some form of a check, may have been used as early as 321 BC in India. Others say that the Romans invented something like a check in 325 BC. But according to most historical records, it's more likely checks weren't around until the early 1500s in Amsterdam. Merchants would give cash to Dutch banks, and in turn the banks agreed to pay the debts out of the money in each account based on the depositor's written notes. This was seen as a safe alternative to carrying around large sums of money all the time. The concept of writing checks soon spread throughout the UK, but it was slow to catch on. People had a hard time trusting a piece of paper that would promise payment. In 1762, a British banker named Lawrence Childs decided to print checks with serial numbers on them as a way to keep track of or check on them. Some would say this is how the check earned its name. Now that's a fun fact you can tell at parties. Fast forward to the mid-19th century United States. People saw checks as the hot new payment method, but not everyone thought I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Porters especially. Banks had porters running all over cities carrying bags of gold, aka the checks, and a ledger book to settle accounts. It was exhausting. This led to the establishment of the clearinghouse, which allowed banks to settle accounts in one location. By the 1950s, everyone was using checks and banks couldn't keep up with processing all this paperwork by hand. That's when magnetic ink character recognition, or MICR, was introduced. This was the series of magnetic characters printed across the bottom of checks. Remember these? Yep, that's all the routing and account information. This code enabled computers to read and process checks much faster than before. What a relief, because that was hard work. Now that people could get their money quicker with a faster processing time, people were writing checks for everything. However, even with faster processing, the original paper checks still had to be returned to the account holder's bank at the end of the process. The Federal Reserve Bank operated a fleet of more than 100 private jets to transport checks across the country each night after the end of business. Crazy, right? While this was costly, it worked just fine until air travel was grounded for 2 days after the events of 9/11. To prevent a situation like this from happening again, Congress passed the Check 21 Act in 2003, which allowed banks to use electronic images of checks rather than physically move original paper checks from bank to bank. Checks are now primarily processed electronically, clearing paper checks at one central location, down from 45 in 2003. And that's it in a nutshell, the history of checks. I told you I'd make it quick. Come back for my next video on key definitions in the world of check fundamentals.